Why is it that the person who swears to love you most can betray you in ways strangers never could? The first time I saw his face crumble was not when I confronted him, but when he realized I'd known everything for weeks and had chosen not to scream. We were seated across from my parents at the long mahogany table where so many holiday dinners had been served. A folder thick with evidence sat between us like a ticking time bomb. My father's hands trembled as he flipped through printouts of bank statements, text messages, and transcripts. Connor, the man I thought I'd build forever with, sat beside me, his fingers clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. When Dad asked if there was anything he'd like to share before we started, Connor mustered the same smile he'd used on our wedding day. "No, everything is great," he said. Minutes later, he watched his carefully constructed lie disintegrate. I hadn't planned for the confrontation to happen this way. I imagined my voice shaking as I hurled accusations, the satisfaction of watching his mask fall. Instead, I sat quietly and watched his world collapse. What do you say when you realize your love story was just a spreadsheet for someone else? 2 weeks earlier, I'd been hiding in the bathroom with the shower running, the steam fogging up the mirror so I couldn't see my own reflection. My hands were shaking around my phone, my entire body vibrating like a taut violin string on the verge of snapping. How do you begin to write the end of your own marriage in a Reddit post while your husband watches television downstairs? It started, as so many tragedies do, with a misunderstanding disguised as a gift. 3 years into our marriage, Connor and I renewed our vows in a quiet ceremony. He cried as he read his vows. He called me his best friend, his safe place, the woman who saved him. Everyone said the way he looked at me was the picture of love. I believed them. I clung to those images so tightly that when they shattered, the shards cut deep. A few days after the renewal, I went on a girls' trip to Nashville with my college friends. We'd spent months planning spa days and wine tours, but illnesses and work emergencies cut the trip short. I decided to surprise Connor. He loved surprises when they came from me. He would send me selfies with puppy dog eyes whenever I was away. I pictured his face when he opened the door to see me, arms full of his favorite nachos and craft beer. I imagined his laugh as we curled up on the couch with my cold feet tucked under his legs. Instead, I came home early and crept up the stairs to his gaming room. I heard his voice through the half-closed door. At first, I thought he was playing online with friends. Connor loved to exaggerate for laughs. But there was no playfulness in his words. Marriage is a complete nightmare, bro. I wake up every day regretting my decision. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribcage, my arms full of nachos suddenly heavy. He kept talking, unaware of me on the stairs. If it wasn't for her family's money, I'd be gone already. The vow renewal was pure torture. "I've gotten good at the performance though, Oscar-worthy." He laughed, a sound I had always thought signaled joy. It sent a wave of nausea through me now. I clutched the railing as his words, money wife, rent-free life, long-term plan, echoed in my head. I'd never felt so blindsided in my life. There are movies where a character hears devastating news and the background noise fades to a high-pitched ring. That's what it felt like. I realized, in a single minute, that our marriage existed in 2 different realities. I didn't burst into the room. I didn't scream or confront him. I backed down the stairs as quietly as I could, set the food on the kitchen counter, and left through the garage. I sat in my car in a parking lot and sobbed until an elderly woman knocked on my window to ask if I was okay. I told her my dog died. The lies began there and multiplied. When your world collapses, you'll say anything to anyone to keep it from spilling out. I returned to Nashville that night and pretended nothing was wrong. I laughed with my friends over dinner and drank too much wine to numb the ache. When I returned home at my scheduled time, Connor greeted me with a kiss. I looked into the eyes of a man who called our marriage a nightmare and said hello like nothing was wrong. My acting skills might not have been Oscar-worthy, but they were convincing enough. I spent the next 5 days in a haze, analyzing every moment of our relationship with this new filter. Had he been reluctant to let me pay off his student loans because he was protecting my generosity or cultivating it? Was his insistence on paying for cheap dinners his way of appearing chivalrous while saving my money for later? Had his tears during our vow renewal been love or calculated manipulation? I ran my fingers over the engraved wooden sign his parents gave us that said where your story begins and wondered if it was always a joke I didn't understand. During those days, Connor continued on as if nothing had changed. He laughed at his favorite show, kissed me goodbye in the morning, called to ask what I wanted for dinner. He couldn't see that I was measuring the minutes between his small withdrawals of $200 or $300 from our joint accounts. Signs of financial infidelity are often subtle. Unexplained withdrawals, hidden spending, defensiveness when confronted about money. Now that I knew to look, the clues were everywhere. He'd always insisted that I trust him with finances. He'd say checking up on each other was unhealthy. I believed him. But the statements I pulled up on my laptop painted a different story, thousands siphoned off under the guise of business expenses. I read an article online that said financial infidelity occurs when partners hide debts or major purchases, and it can damage trust and lead to separation. It listed signs like hidden accounts, secret shopping, and large withdrawals. My body went cold as I checked off each one. Statistics show that 41% of Americans have hidden spending or accounts from a partner, and hiding finances often leads to betrayal and anxiety. It was horrifying to realize I had become part of that statistic. I thought about the times he'd insisted on buying the cheaper wine so my dad wouldn't think he was taking advantage of us. I thought of his reluctance to let me see his student loan statements. I remembered him telling me that privacy was healthy and that couples who needed to check each other's finances lacked trust. It felt romantic then. It felt manipulative now. Manipulators know your weaknesses and exploit them until you set boundaries. By presenting his reluctance as respect for my independence, he kept me from seeing the truth. I began to see other patterns, too. He'd always insisted on managing our bills. I thought it was because he was good with numbers. Over time, he discouraged me from checking the accounts, saying it made him feel emasculated. I'd been proud of being a trusting wife who didn't nag. According to a checklist for financial abuse, preventing a partner from accessing money, putting them on an allowance, forcing them to hand over paychecks, and refusing to work are all warning signs. Connor hadn't checked every box, but he had checked enough for me to feel a chill run down my spine. When my mind turned to what to do next, it oscillated between fury and strategy. My first instinct was to confront him. I envisioned myself yelling, his face pale as he realized I'd overheard everything. But a small, rational voice whispered to wait. If he married me for money, then leaving rashly could give him exactly what he wanted. I decided to be methodical. I opened a separate bank account at a branch he didn't know about. I changed my passwords and added verbal security questions with my personal bank. I called the bank to ensure they wouldn't discuss my account with anyone but me. I started transferring small amounts of money from our joint account into mine. Nothing huge, just enough each day that he wouldn't notice. According to divorce attorneys, community property is shared, but if a spouse uses marital funds for an affair or deception, the innocent partner can recoup those losses. I wasn't yet thinking of divorce, but I wasn't going to let him siphon off our savings while I cried in the bathroom. There are legal terms for what he was doing. Some call it financial abuse. Others call it financial betrayal. Deliberately hiding debts, siphoning money, and misusing shared funds erodes trust and creates emotional distress. The signs include unexplained withdrawals and secrecy. I read these words at 3 a.m. while sitting on the tile floor, the cold seeping up through my pajamas. Each sentence felt like validation and a knife twist. I wasn't crazy. This wasn't a small misunderstanding. This was betrayal. One thing you need to know about me, I'm a planner. When life spirals, I write lists. It makes chaos feel manageable. My list for leaving my husband included the usual. Secure finances, gather documents, find a lawyer. But it also included play along. I knew if he suspected anything, he'd adjust his strategy. He'd charm my parents, push for children, maybe expedite his timeline. I needed to see the full scope of his deception before I acted. The weekend trip he proposed came at the perfect time. After I returned from Nashville, he texted me to suggest a luxury resort getaway to reconnect. I agreed, but suggested we go to my family's cabin by the lake instead. The cabin had spotty Wi-Fi and no luxury services. I wanted to watch him without the distractions of fancy restaurants. How does a man obsessed with a gravy train behave when he thinks the gravy might run out? At the cabin, he paced the deck, phone in hand, seeking a signal. He wandered down to the end of the dock, huddled over his phone. When I quietly followed, I heard him whispering, "I'm going crazy being trapped here. I'll make it up to you when I get back." Who was he talking to? What did he need to make up for? Later, I discover a second phone in his nightstand with one contact saved as D. Denise, his ex. The texts talked about long-term plans and staying the course. One message said, "Just 2 more years and we're set." Reading that later felt like stepping into an alternate universe where I was just a stepping stone. Back at home, I started strategically altering my behavior. I accidentally left open a browser tab with my separate bank account information. I mentioned that my dad was reconsidering his business ventures due to economic concerns. I began taking more private calls in the bathroom and working late. I scheduled a plumber to fix the leaking sink, something Connor had promised to do for months, and watched him flinch when the plumber charged $85. Each small change made him uneasy. He started hovering around me, glancing at my phone, asking if everything was okay. Meanwhile, I dug into our finances. I spent nights at Starbucks, disguised as client meetings, combing through statements. Over 3 years, Connor had withdrawn over $117,000 from our joint accounts for investments that never materialized. There were large withdrawals right before trips to his hometown. I pictured him handing cash to someone else, fueling a separate life. In the legal articles I read, experts said that when a spouse uses shared money to support an affair, the innocent spouse can recoup those losses. They recommended forensic accounting. I felt like my own forensic accountant, armed with highlighters and hope. One night, while he was at the gym, I rifled through his nightstand. I felt guilty even as I did it. Invading his privacy still felt wrong, despite his betrayal. I found a prepaid phone, the passcode scribbled on the back. The only contact. Dozens of texts discussed money, meetups, and a plan. They referenced our vow renewal, laughing about how my family looked so misty-eyed. They talked about me as the money wife and referred to the vow renewal as the last hurdle before phase 2. I took pictures of every message. I had physical proof that our marriage was a business transaction to him. After reading more about emotional manipulation, I realized how often Connor used classic tactics: gaslighting, passive-aggressive comments, and love bombing. Gaslighting involves making someone doubt their reality. When I'd question him about finances, he'd say I was being paranoid or controlling. He'd reinterpret events to make me feel guilty for asking. Passive-aggressive remarks disguised as jokes were his specialty, like, "I wish I could be lazy like you and let my parents pay all my bills." After each argument, he would shower me with affection and gifts, classic love bombing. Reading descriptions of these behaviors was like reading a manual of his moves. During this time, we went to dinner at my parents' house, something Connor had insisted on. He turned on his charm full blast, complimenting my mom's curtains, asking my dad about his golf swing, offering to help my sister assemble her new sound system. He casually mentioned researching investment properties in their neighborhood. My dad, oblivious to the true intention, started talking about rising property values. Connor's eyes lit up like a slot machine. Later that night, I caught him on our iPad looking at houses way beyond our budget. He said my dad had mentioned helping with a down payment. He hadn't. It was a test to see if my family would fund his next project. The next day, I met with Loretta, my best friend since college and the only person I had confided in. Over salads at a quiet cafe, I told her everything. She squeezed my hand and said, "You're living with a parasite." She recommended a lawyer who didn't move in our social circles. When we hugged goodbye, I felt like I had a teammate. Meeting the lawyer was surreal. She was kind but direct. She explained that in our state, we lived under community property rules. Everything acquired during the marriage belonged to both of us. However, if one spouse uses marital funds to support an affair or fraud, the court can compensate the other. Our prenuptial agreement, which I thought would protect me, could be invalidated if fraud was involved. Prenups require full and fair disclosure. Hiding assets or debts can make them void. It was possible that his deception could be considered fraud, but we needed evidence. My heart pounded as I slid across photos of his secret phone and bank statements. I left the lawyer's office feeling equal parts relieved and devastated. There was a roadmap, but following it meant accepting that my marriage was over. It's one thing to know you need to leave. It's another to file the papers. Back at home, Connor oscillated between over-the-top affection and desperate control. He surprised me at work with flowers and lunch, something he'd never done in 3 years of marriage. He started doing chores he'd ignored for months. He suggested we start trying for a baby, something he had postponed for years. When I asked why the sudden change, he gave a speech about realizing what truly mattered. I wondered if he wanted a baby to secure his financial future. One evening, he found me in bed crying silently. He climbed in beside me, wrapped his arms around me, and started crying too. He said he felt like he was losing me and didn't know why. For a brief second, the memory of the man I fell in love with flickered. Then he ruined it by asking if my dad was still thinking of selling part of the business. He was always careful to slip financial questions into moments of vulnerability. It was his way of seeing if the gravy train was still on track. 2 weeks after the discovery, I decided to test him. While I was out running errands, I left a printout of our joint account on my desk showing his large withdrawals. When I checked my phone later, I had 27 missed calls from him. He sounded frantic when I called back, asking if everything was okay, if something happened with my family, if I was mad at him. I said my phone had been in my purse while I was at Target. The silence on his end was deafening. He knew I'd seen the statements. He knew the foundation was cracking. After that, he suggested another vow renewal ceremony for the family members who couldn't attend the first one. When I asked why, he stammered about celebrating our love. In reality, he wanted another public display to cement his place. I smiled and said maybe next year. I started having lunch with Loretta weekly. She offered to store important items at her place under the guise of borrowing them for an Instagram photo shoot. I delivered family heirlooms and irreplaceable documents in tote bags. She looked at me as we locked them in her guest room and said, "You're saving yourself." The psychological warfare was exhausting. Connor went through my closet and left my boots in a different order. He scrolled through my iPad search history and found terms like signs your husband is cheating and separate bank accounts in marriage. Each small piece of bait I left made him more anxious. He tried to fix the fridge clicking, the porch light, the squeaky door. He became the handyman he never was. It was like watching someone frantically prove their value. Around that time, I looked up the symptoms of emotional manipulation again. Threats and coercion, withdrawal of affection, isolation. He alternated between them. When I was distant, he withdrew affection to punish me. When I was cold, he threatened to leave, to move back to his hometown. Then he'd pull me into his arms and whisper that he couldn't live without me. My head spun. I started seeing a therapist, who told me that trust isn't a weakness. Breaking it is. It's a simple statement that I remind myself of often. The real turning point came one night during dinner when I decided to begin revealing my hand. We were eating in our dining room, candles flickering, our wedding album on the shelf above. He poured me a glass of wine with shaking hands. We ate in strained silence. Then, out of nowhere, he suggested we start trying for a baby. I nearly choked. "Why the sudden change of heart?" I asked. I realized what truly matters," he said, eyes glistening. "I love you more than anything. I'm ready for the next step." I wanted to laugh. This was the man who had called our marriage a nightmare. I set my fork down and looked at him, not as the man I thought I loved, but as the man I'd overheard. "That's quite a coincidence," I said slowly. "I've been reflecting on our future too." His face lit up with hope, a child at Christmas. "Really?" "Yes," I said. "I've been thinking a lot about honesty in marriage, about what people really mean versus what they say. Do you remember your vows? About how meeting me was the best thing that ever happened to you." "Of course," he said, trying to take my hand. I pulled my hand away. "That's interesting, because I could have sworn I heard you tell Danny that the vow renewal was pure torture, and you had to make up romantic bullshit while my family looked on misty-eyed." He knocked over his wine glass, red liquid spreading like blood across the tablecloth. His face turned gray. He opened his mouth and closed it soundless. Maybe I misheard. I continued softly, my voice trembling only slightly. Maybe you didn't call our marriage a nightmare and say you wake up regretting your decision every day. Maybe I imagined the part where you said the only good thing about our relationship is my family's money and that you've gotten good at the performance. He stammered about being frustrated, about venting, about rough patches. He said he'd been going through personal issues. He said he loved me. He cried. He pleaded. He tried every tactic he'd used to control me before. I just sat there listening. Are you leaving me? He asked finally, tears streaking his face. I haven't decided yet, I lied. I had already called a lawyer. I had already transferred the money. I had already planned my exit. But letting him think he still had a chance was part of the plan. What followed was 2 weeks of emotional manipulation on a level I didn't think possible. He sent flowers to my office daily with apologies written on cards. He reached out to my parents, telling them I was acting strangely and he was worried. He suggested couples therapy. He staged grand gestures, like cooking elaborate meals and drawing me baths. He avoided mentioning money at all. He never said a word about his own deceptions. I continued preparing. I removed him as beneficiary from certain accounts. My parents, after I told them everything, vowed to support me. We scheduled a meeting with our family's financial advisor. I packed essentials and moved them to a storage unit. I filed the divorce papers but didn't serve them yet. I wanted him to sweat. One night, we attended a dinner party at Scarlett's new house. Scarlett, who he usually found too much, suddenly became his favorite person. He laughed at her jokes, complimented her TikTok dance videos. During dinner, someone brought up a news story about a man who scammed his wealthy wife. Everyone laughed about what an idiot he was. Connor went quiet, stabbing his mashed potatoes. Lucas, Scarlett's boyfriend, asked him what he thought. Connor muttered, "Not all relationships are what they seem." The table grew silent. I asked Scarlett to pass the salt. On the drive home, Connor was unusually quiet. In the garage, he turned to me with desperation. "Is everything okay between us? Maybe you should check your conscience if you feel something's wrong," I replied, staring straight ahead. He flinched. The morning of the meeting with my parents and the financial advisor, Connor acted like a man going to church. He wore his nicest suit. He shaved. He held my hand in the car. He had no idea he was being led to his own trial. We sat in my dad's home office. My parents looked tired, older than they had a month ago. Mr. Bradshaw, the advisor, sat with his reading glasses perched low on his nose. Connor smiled, charming as ever. Dad began, "Connor, is there anything you'd like to tell us before we begin?" Connor frowned slightly. "No, everything's great," he said. Dad slid a folder across the table. It contained printouts of his secret withdrawals, screenshots of texts to Denise, and a transcript of the phone call where he had called our marriage a nightmare. Connor's face strained. He looked at me, then at my parents. "What is this?" he whispered. Mom's voice shook as she spoke. "It's proof that you've been lying to our daughter. Proof that you married her for money." Connor started to protest, to spin his story, to claim he was misunderstood. Mom cut him off. "You called her the money wife. You laughed about manipulating our whole family. You think we're going to let you continue?" Her voice was icy. Mr. Bradshaw explained that Connor was being removed from all family accounts, trusts, and business interests. Dad said divorce papers would be delivered that afternoon. Connor could take 24 hours to remove his belongings. Connor's eyes widened. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. "Are you really going to throw away 3 years because of one stupid conversation?" "You threw it away when you decided I was nothing but a bank account," I replied. The moment felt both anticlimactic and monumental. I was calm, almost detached. It wasn't like the screaming matches I'd imagined. It was a surgical removal of toxicity. The divorce was messy but swift. Connor fought at first, demanding half of everything, including future interests in my family's business. He argued that he had contributed to building my career and supporting my family's ventures. My attorney calmly played a recording of him calling me the money wife and saying he'd get out once he was established. That recording destroyed his leverage. When a spouse enters a marriage under fraudulent pretenses, like hiding assets or lying about intentions, courts can void parts of prenuptial agreements. The evidence of his deception was overwhelming. Eventually, he accepted significantly less than he'd hoped for. Still more than he deserved, but enough to make the proceedings end without dragging on. He looked at me during our final mediation and whispered, "I really did love you, you know." I didn't respond. I didn't trust anything he said. Emotionally, the months after the confrontation were brutal. I cycled through rage, grief, humiliation, and self-doubt. Some nights I replayed our entire relationship, analyzing every conversation for signs I missed. Was he manipulating me from the start? How could I be so naive? My therapist reminded me that trusting someone isn't stupidity. The betrayal lay in his deception, not in my faith. It's a hard truth to internalize, but it freed me from some of the shame. I moved out of our house before it sold. I found a small apartment downtown. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I decorated it with color. Bright yellow curtains, turquoise throw pillows, art prints I'd admired for years but never bought because they weren't our style. The first night there, I felt both triumphant and hollow. The quiet felt like both a sanctuary and a void. I slept with the bedroom door open, listening for a phantom husband who wasn't there. Rebuilding a life after betrayal is messy. Some days, I felt invincible, like I dodged a bullet. Other days, I cried because I missed the life I thought we had. There are strange moments of grief, like hearing a song you danced to at your wedding and realizing it's forever tainted. There are also small joys, like snorting with laughter at a TikTok in public and not apologizing for being too loud. My parents were heartbroken. My dad apologized to me, saying he worried that growing up with money made me a target. He felt he should have prepared me. I told him the only person responsible for Connor's actions was Connor. My mom swung between fury and humor. She sent me articles like 10 signs that man is just after your money and insisted on vetting any future dates. I declined every blind date she attempted to arrange. I wasn't ready. I discovered that some mutual friends took Connor's side. Tina, one of my girlfriends from Nashville, believed his story. She said I was being dramatic and that he'd only vented. She stopped responding to my texts. It stung, but it clarified who was truly my friend. Loretta and Scarlett were my rocks. Scarlett said she'd always thought Connor was off. Loretta reminded me that I was free now. Connor didn't disappear completely. He attempted to contact me once after the divorce. He showed up at my apartment, letter in hand. I refused to open the door. He left the letter in my mailbox anyway. It alternated between apology and justification. He claimed he'd grown to love me despite his initial motivations. He said he regretted his words to Danny. He said he missed us. I read it once. Then I shredded it. His words had no power anymore. One day, I received a Facebook message from a woman I didn't know, Denise. D. Connor's college ex. She said she'd been in contact with him throughout our marriage. He'd sent her money regularly and promised they'd be together once the plan was complete. She attached screenshots of their conversations, including one where he said our vow renewal was the last hurdle before they could move to phase 2. She wrote that she felt betrayed and wanted me to know she wasn't complicit. I wasn't angry. I pitied her. I replied, good luck. You'll need it. Recovering from financial betrayal is a process. Articles on financial betrayal emphasize open communication, establishing boundaries, seeking professional help, and legal action. I did all of that, but there's one piece the articles don't mention: rewriting your own narrative. I had to decide who I was outside of being Connor's wife, outside of being my father's daughter with money. I had to find my own identity again. I threw myself into work, but I also explored hobbies I had shelved. I started taking a cooking class. Connor had always dominated the kitchen. He claimed cooking was his love language. Now, I marinated vegetables and seared steaks with my own hands. I burned a pan once and laughed instead of crying. I signed up for a pottery workshop. The first time my fingers shaped wet clay, I felt grounded. I started going to yoga. I went on a solo trip to Italy, something I'd always postponed because Connor didn't like traveling abroad. I ate gelato alone at sunset and cried because I felt both alone and utterly free. I also volunteered with a local organization that supports women experiencing domestic and financial abuse. I met women whose stories made mine feel almost mild. Their partners had drained accounts, taken out loans in their names, left them with debt. I shared my story in small groups, and we cried together. I learned that financial abuse is widespread and often hidden. Being believed and supported is crucial. We made each other feel less alone. My therapist and I worked on rebuilding trust, in myself and others. She reminded me that not everyone has an agenda. She encouraged me to set boundaries and maintain financial independence. I created a budget. I checked my accounts regularly. I learned about investments. I signed up for a class about personal finance. I wanted to ensure I would never again be in the dark. She also helped me process the manipulation I endured. Recognizing the gaslighting and love bombing allowed me to be kinder to myself. I realized I'd been conditioned to doubt my instincts. Healing meant learning to trust myself again. Months after the divorce, I saw a photo of Connor online. He was at a charity gala with a new woman on his arm. Her smile looked genuine. His looked the same as it always had. My stomach didn't twist. I felt relief. Relief that he was someone else's problem. Relief that I wasn't waking up next to a man who regretted marrying me. Relief that my bank account was mine alone. The house sold quickly. With my share, I paid off remaining student loans and invested the rest. I kept the engraved sign from Connor's parents for a while, tucked in a closet. One day, I took it out and stared at where your story begins. I thought about burning it. Instead, I donated it. My story didn't begin with Connor, and it certainly doesn't end with him. I no longer call myself a victim. I'm a survivor of financial betrayal. I've learned that money and trust are intimately linked. Hiding finances from a partner erodes trust and can cause anxiety and depression. It's hard to trust again when you've been used, but it's possible. I've dated casually. I've been upfront about my financial boundaries. I've learned to listen to my instincts. If someone makes a passive-aggressive comment about my wealth or tries to make me feel guilty for having money, I walk away. I no longer feel the need to rescue anyone financially. My therapist says that's growth. There are still moments when the past surfaces. Sometimes I wake up from a dream where I'm back on that staircase, hearing his voice call our marriage a nightmare. I sit up, heart pounding, and remind myself I'm safe. I go to the kitchen of my colorful apartment and make coffee. I water my plants. I open the window and feel the morning air. I whisper, "You're okay." When I look back now, I don't see a naive woman who was fooled. I see a woman who loved, trusted, and gave. I see a woman who, when confronted with betrayal, took control. I see someone who refused to be a money wife and reclaimed her life. The scars remain, but they remind me of my strength. If anyone reading this is in a similar situation, know this: signs of financial infidelity, unexplained withdrawals, secrecy around spending, defensiveness are not small things. Financial abuse is real and can be as damaging as physical abuse. If your partner manipulates you, gaslights you, or treats your trust as currency, you deserve better. Protect yourself. Trust your instincts. Seek help. There is life after betrayal. Messy, beautiful, complicated life. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is quietly plan your exit while the shower runs and then rebuild stronger, one brick at a time.